Professor Seyed Marandi, Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, joins us at this most auspicious time. Professor, it's always a pleasure to see you. It's more important to see you perhaps tonight than any other night, as we may be on the threshold of dramatic events. Indeed, next door to you in Yemen, the most traumatic event imaginable has just taken place. The murder of virtually all of the government of Yemen, being boasted about by the perpetrators, the murderers, the gang in Tel Aviv around Benjamin Netanyahu. I posed the question earlier, what could possibly go wrong with this strategy? The idea that the Yemenis are going to give up because you slaughtered their leaders rather than redouble their efforts seems to be, east is east, west is west, never the twain shall meet and all that. It seems difficult for Westerners, including the Westerners who run the settler state, to understand that simple truth. What say you?
George, one of the interesting things that has come out of this that people came to recognize is that actually the prime minister of Yemen, who was martyred, was from the south, and he was a Sunni. And that shows that this is not the Houthis, this is that the West tries to call them all the time. This is the people of Yemen who are united in their support for the Palestinian people and who have been making sacrifices for the people of Gaza in a way in which only Hezbollah has also given that degree of sacrifice. And the members of the cabinet who were martyred, they were people who dealt with civil society. They were not military commanders except for one individual. They were all dealing with health or education or the economy. They were dealing with the problems of ordinary people, the problems that the United States and the Saudis and the Emiratis and NATO created in their 7-year-long genocidal war. They too carried out a starvation siege on Yemen for 7 years, which just ended a few years ago. So the Israeli regime has only shown its brutality, and once again it's shown that it is lawless and that it does not target the military, it targets civilians. It specializes in targeting civilians. As we saw the evidence come out on Gaza, the Israelis themselves know that overwhelmingly, almost 90% of the casualties in Gaza have been civilians. So they've been lying about it, the West has been lying about it, and the Western media has been lying about it. But the people of Yemen have, as I said earlier, they've lived through 7 years of genocidal war by the Saudis. And over the past 3 years, they've been 3.5 years, the last 2 years, since the genocidal war in Gaza began, they've been bombed by the Americans and the Israelis. They're not going to change course. They're going to be more steadfast, and they're going to be more popular across the region and across the world. The Israeli regime doesn't recognize that the more it carries out strikes against Iran, the more popular Iran becomes. The more they strike Hezbollah, the more popular Hezbollah becomes. The more they strike Ansarullah and the Yemeni armed forces, the more popular Yemen becomes. So the Israeli regime can celebrate all it wants, but it is only making things worse for itself, and it is making heroes out of these martyrs, and the people who will replace them will continue down the road of resistance. The Israeli regime has made a grave mistake by continuing this genocidal war for 2 years now. Across the world, it is despised, and it has shown itself to be vulnerable. We saw how Hamas and the resistance carried out a successful operation the other night, a very impressive operation. They are very much alive, and the Israeli regime, being despised across the world, has no future in this region.
I may have missed it, but did any Arab government condemn the assassination of virtually an entire cabinet in an Arab country?
Of course not, George. All of these countries, all of the Arab countries, except for maybe one or two, they supported the Saudi and Emirati genocidal war against Yemen for 7 years. And when American ships in the Red Sea were blocking food and medicine from entering Yemen, they all supported that. And back then, by the way, Qatar and Erdogan also supported the genocidal war. They supported the genocidal war until the divide between Qatar and the Saudis and the Emiratis emerged. And then they parted ways. And then Al Jazeera started shifting its coverage and changing its tone on Yemen. So they've never been sympathetic towards the Yemeni people. They've never cared about the Yemeni people. In fact, the propaganda against Ansarullah and Yemen has been so negative that many people had a poor view of them across ordinary people across the Arab world. And then it turns out that these people who had been so demonized, including among Palestinians, turned out to be the ones who were making, alongside Hezbollah and Iran, the greatest sacrifices for the Palestinian people. And so the people of Yemen and the government and Ansarullah, who were looked down upon and belittled, now they're the shining star of the Arab world. But none of these regimes will show sympathy because they're all in the Western camp, whether it's Morocco or the Emirates, whether it's Egypt or Jordan, whether it's Turkey or Bahrain. They're all in the American camp, and none of them are going to support the Palestinian people. And of course, by extension, none of them are going to support the people of Yemen.
Now, the Yemenis are not going to take this lying down, are they? They've already shown that they are capable at any moment and have repeatedly struck infrastructure targets inside the Zionist state. They're likely to do so again, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And we've seen how Yemeni missiles and drones have become increasingly advanced. And in their latest attack on the Israeli regime in recent days, we saw that they scored. But also, the Israelis, every time that Yemen strikes, they have to use their surface-to-air missiles. And they are already depleted to a large degree. And they're also giving information about the status of their weapon systems and where they are. So when the time comes, when there will be a major conflict between Iran and the Israeli regime, each one of these Yemeni missiles are going to be able to collect an enormous amount of intelligence for that day, and they're going to be helping to deplete the Israeli surface-to-air missile systems for that day. But also, as Yemeni missiles become more advanced, they're going to become more dangerous for the regime. That when these missiles explode in Tel Aviv or elsewhere, or even when they're intercepted, it creates fear. It prevents people from moving to Palestine. It prevents people from working in Palestine. It prevents tourists from going back to Palestine. It only makes life continue to stay abnormal. And so what the people of Yemen are doing to the Israelis, the damage that they're doing is enormous, whether their missiles strike their targets or not. But more importantly, what they're doing is that they're shaming the rest of the region. Turkey, which has an enormous army, does nothing for the Palestinian people, yet Yemen, which has survived years of genocidal war, and today has been fighting against the Americans and the Israelis for 2 years, they are using their military to help the Palestinian people. The Egyptian armed forces, which lie right on the other side of the border of Gaza, they do nothing, yet Yemen sacrifices its soldiers and even its highest ranking officials, as does Hezbollah. So this is changing the mentality of people across the region towards the resistance, towards those who have been hypocritical. And it also shows the weakness of the Israeli regime, that they cannot deter the people of Yemen, despite all of the support that they get from the collective West. Because this is not Israel that's carrying out this war. This is the entire West that's carrying out this war. Israel is a puny regime, completely dependent on handouts from North America, from Europe, and from Australia and elsewhere. And of course, as the West declines, it's going to be more difficult for them to continue giving the sort of handouts that they've been getting in the past. But this puny regime, which is totally dependent, with all the technology that it has failed to deter the people of Yemen for the last 2 years. And this is something that history will remember. Yemen, what they've done for humanity over the last 2 years is unique.
And ditto the resistance inside the invaded Gaza territory itself. The Americans are openly acknowledging, and even Israeli officials, usually retired, are openly acknowledging that the resistance has more fighters than it did before October 8th and the beginning of this genocide, has more and more successes. I mean, you mentioned last night, but there's another going on right now, a security situation, in their words, which is extremely serious right now. It may be that more prisoners of war have been taken, who will be described as hostages, even though they're in a foreign army which is invading an internationally recognized occupied territory. The resistance is not going away in Gaza, and killing Abu Ubaidah, if he has been killed, they've killed 400 of his family members. 400. So they may well have killed him. They certainly are now claiming that they have, but that's going to change nothing except for the worse for them.
Yes, I remember when Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was martyred. I was in Beirut, and immediately Western journalists contacted me and put me on television and said, "What will happen now?" And I said, "Nothing. Hezbollah will continue the fight. His disciples will continue the resistance." Later on, when martyr Yahya Sinwar, when we saw his body, they again contacted me and they said, "Well, what happens now?" And I said, "There are thousands of Yahya Sinwars in Gaza." They don't understand that by killing the prime minister of Yemen, his martyrdom is not going to turn the tide in favor of the Israeli regime. By murdering the leaders of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah, they're not going to turn the tide. We've been told that Hezbollah is badly weakened. But look at the United States. They've mobilized Al-Qaeda in Syria. Their proxies in Syria, Jolani and ISIS and Al-Qaeda on the one hand, the Israeli regime in the south, and also their proxies in Lebanon, the Lebanese forces and the fascists and pro-Western parties in Lebanon, all of them have been mobilized with Saudi money, and yet they're fearful of attacking the resistance. They're fearful of trying to disarm the resistance. Why? Because Hezbollah is very powerful, and Hezbollah is not going to go away, and Hezbollah's arms are not going to go away. So the resistance is much stronger than they pretend. They like to say that the resistance in Yemen has been dealt a major blow, or in Gaza they've been defeated, or in Lebanon they've been decimated. The reality is they are steadfast and strong. The real loser in all this has been the West and the Israeli regime. The West, their image has been destroyed across the world. No one will ever again believe Western claims with regards to human rights or women's rights or anything else. And the Israeli regime has been seen as genocidal across the world. This alone is more damaging than anything that the Israeli regime has imposed upon the rest of the region. Each of these martyrs in Lebanon, in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Iran, in Yemen, and in Iraq as well, and a couple in Jordan, all of them have contributed to this enormous defeat of the Israeli regime. And this destruction of the image of the West, and especially the Israeli regime, will have grave consequences for the regime in future. This regime cannot last. It may take a while, it may take a few years, but this regime is dying.
Well, you have your leaders and your icons. I have mine. Che Guevara said, it matters not if I fall. What matters is how many men come forward to pick up my rifle. And all the signs are that all the martyrs in Gaza have been replaced by 10, 20, 50 or 100 more fighters racing to pick up their rifles. Let's turn, Professor, to the big enchilada. You must be, as the rest of us are, reading hourly of the imminence of an Israeli attack on your country. First of all, do you think that is going to happen? And secondly, if it definitely is going to happen, why don't you get your retaliation in first?
Well, actually, I'm at a friend's home and we're here for dinner. And so that shows how fearful the people of Iran are. We're all living our normal lives, and we're not really following this news as closely as some people are online. The Israeli regime, as you pointed out earlier before we began our discussion, they lost the war. We know that from the fact that Steve Bannon has said it at least twice, that they were being battered and Trump saved them. And we know that at the end, during the last 3 or so days of the war, almost all Iranian missiles went right through these layered air defenses that the Americans and the Israelis and others had collaborated to put together to prevent Iranian missiles from striking their targets. Iran won that war. And back then it was a blitzkrieg attack, of course illegal, with the full support of the United States and the Europeans and the International Atomic Energy Agency facilitating it by lying. But now Iran is much stronger because Iran has, the Israeli regime gave it its best shot. It was supposed to be a regime change operation. So they used everything they had. And the Iranians now know the capabilities of the Israelis, the regime, and the Iranians have been dealing with their own internal issues, security, with their military shortcomings. Everything is being reorganized and rearranged, and Iran is producing more advanced missiles as well. So if we go to round 2, Iran is going to hit much harder, and the Israeli regime will pay a much heavier price. And I think they know that. I think that those who are sane in the Israeli regime, in the military, know that it's not a good idea. But the issue is that Netanyahu is not pursuing the interests of the Israeli regime. He's pursuing the interests of Netanyahu. And these 2 years have all been destructive for the regime. There's been no victory for the Israelis. A regime that is despised across the world can never call itself victorious. So this regime does not have an interest in attacking Iran. But since yet Netanyahu knows that as soon as the war ends, he will be out of power, and probably soon afterwards he'll be in jail, he will continue these wars. So there's a good chance that at some point there will be a military conflict between the Israeli regime and Iran, despite the fact that it won't end well for the regime. I think I know what your next question is, but I'll still wait.
Well, my next question is to illustrate the point that both you and I have made this evening. Israel is a part of the West. Its crimes are a part of the crimes of the West. And now the European Union have installed these so-called snapback sanctions to try to further damage the Iranian economy. And so it kind of underscores my earlier question, which you deftly avoided. Why don't you get your retaliation in first?
Oh, I forgot to respond to that. I thought you were going to ask the question that you told your the gentleman who called you about a nuclear strike, and you said you're going to leave that for me. I thought that's what you were going to ask.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if Iran will strike first or not, George. Iran never accepted a ceasefire. Iran accepted a halt, a cessation in violence. There's no agreement. Iran did not accept anything. We just stopped. They said that if they stop, we will stop. And the Israeli regime has been making threats against Iran. So it's clear that if the Iranians strike the Israeli regime, they have, the world actually, George, I think you and I both know this, the world will celebrate.
Tell me, in relation to the caller, if Iran's new capabilities, new organization, begins to prevail in another round, as I'm certain that it would, the man's question, and it's a question on everybody's lips, will Israel fire nuclear weapons against Iran in those circumstances?
Well, I don't know. And sorry, I got cut off for a second. I don't know. But the current head, the new head of the Supreme National Security Council, before he became the head of this body, he said when he was the advisor to the leader, but he didn't have this position. He said that if Iran's security, if Iran's existence is at risk, then Iran's nuclear posture will change. And I think it's very clear what he meant. And therefore, the smart thing for the Israeli regime and its backers in the West to do would be to back off, because Iran's technological capabilities are clear to everyone. And I think Iran's missile capabilities have shown that. But I just want to say one thing very briefly about the snapback, because my voice got cut off. The snapback is more of a psychological issue. People in Iran are wondering what impact it will have, and it will have an impact in the short term on the markets. But it won't have a major impact, if any, in the long term on the Iranian economy, because those UN Security Council resolutions which were passed, and they were passed at a time when the United States was the hyperpower, and Russia, China, and others were much weaker than today. But those sanctions had to do with the nuclear program and Iran's military capabilities. It has nothing to do with the economy. And the United States has already imposed maximum pressure sanctions. These will not be new sanctions that the Iranian people will have to deal with. So it is a psychological effect which will go away after a few weeks when the UN Security Council resolutions will be reinstalled. I, of course, have said many times that I think that this was the JCPOA, or the nuclear deal, could have been negotiated much better, and we should not have had this snapback provision. But in any case, it is not going to have that sort of impact. And the world has changed. And the Russians and the Chinese, alongside the Iranians, have said that the snapback by the Europeans is not legitimate, because they are the side that violated the deal, not the Iranians, and they did not abide by the provisions to bring the snapback. So we live in a different world today, George, and you've seen how the leaders of well over 20 countries have gathered together in Tianjin, including the Iranian president, for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. We're living in a new world. And the West and the United States and the Europeans in particular, they are losing their influence. And the Europeans, by the way, by imposing this snapback, they will lose their last foothold in Iran. They will never be, they will never have any special status in Iran again. They burned their bridges with the Russians, with the Chinese, and now with the Iranians. And they can just go back and forth to Washington like the little doors that they are, and continue to go downhill for the decades to come with because of the policies that they currently pursue. So the snapback in the long run hurts the Europeans because that was their only foothold in Iran. That was the JCPOA was the agreement where the Iranians and the Europeans would get together and talk. If there's no JCPOA, there's no need for us to talk with the Europeans anymore.
I mean, talk about Orientalism. You referred there to the SCO conference in Tianjin, and more than half the world is represented there. The leaders of the most important and biggest countries in the world are there. Biggest economies are there. Biggest concentration of wealth are there. Yet, I promise you, Professor, not a single whisper of this extraordinary summit where the Indian president is warmly embracing the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, after decades of war, where the isolated Russians are right at the center of real-world events. Not a whisper of the existence of this gathering has yet appeared on any mainstream British broadcaster. That's Orientalism for you, isn't it?
Absolutely. But these are the same people who for 2 years have been trying to hide the genocide in Gaza and try to justify the mass slaughter and the crimes against humanity that are being carried out on a daily basis by the Israeli regime. These are the same people who've been telling us until just a few months ago that Russia is losing the war in Ukraine. They've been lying to their people for many years. But over the last few years, as the decline of the West has been increasing in pace, their lies have become more outrageous, and their reporting has become more like the reporting of the Soviet Union during the Soviet times. They have no credibility among their own people. They have no credibility across the world. They had an opportunity, George, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the United States was the hyperpower. They had a lot of control. A lot of people gave up ideology during that period when we had reached the end of history, as Fukuyama said back then. And a lot of people put resistance aside. And the United States and the Europeans squandered that moment. And they've been waging war after war against people across the world. And they've been waging war, economic war, against their own people as well. And so in much less than 30 years, it's ever since in the 2008, let's say, it's 2007 and 8 and 9 when we had the economic crisis. Ever since then, it's become clear for many people that the West is in deep trouble. It is completely corrupt, and the media has no credibility. And what we're seeing today is far worse than what we saw in the previous decades.